Welcome to richplanet.net. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's programme is about the history of ufology. Some people are keen to criticise ufology as a subject. In fact, when using Microsoft Word, the programme tries to correct the word ufology to urology. People say things like, well, it's just a pseudoscience. Ufology is not a science any more than geography and history are sciences. Sciences rely on being able to set up certain conditions so that theories can be tested in a controlled environment, then proven or disproven. By its very nature, ufology does not have that luxury. UFOs don't generally hang around long enough to be put under laboratory conditions. This is what makes ufology such a target for the skeptics, the lack of repeatable evidence. I would dispute that there is a lack of repeatable evidence, however. But the reason why there is not more evidence is because the American government has hidden it from public view for over 60 years. Although ufology is not a science, when pursuing answers to ufological questions, many other disciplines are brought into play. Anthropology, astronomy, physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, religion, geology, history, genetics, forensics, and engineering are all subjects used by ufologists in the pursuit of their goals. Mark my words, once disclosure of the facts about UFOs are revealed by the government, your children will be taking GCSEs in ufology. What's your degree in? Ufology, specialising in anti-gravity and the small grey of Zeta Reticuli. The ufology GCSE will probably be the most popular subject on the curriculum. By that time, the pseudoscience skeptics will probably have crawled into small holes in the ground. Like most subjects, the more you learn, the more you realise how little you know, and ufology is no exception. In 2 half-hour programmes, I cannot do justice to this huge subject, but we'll try with the use of a timeline to outline the main events and personalities in UFO history. Perhaps teachers in the future will show this programme to GCSE students in their first lesson. I'll split the timeline up into decades, starting in the 1930s and working forwards. Before I do that, a quick word about past millennia. Here's a translation from an ancient Egyptian text dating from 1500 BC. A circle of fire coming in the sky, noiseless, 1 rod long with its body and 1 rod wide. After some days, these things become more numerous, shining more than the brightness of the sun. And another quotation from the time of Alexander the Great, around 330 BC. His soldiers witnessed flying shields circling a city that they were laying siege to. The large shield shone a beam of light on the city that caused its walls to crumble. We'll start with the rather unsavoury dictator Benito Mussolini. After a UFO came down in Milan in 1933, he sent a telegram to the Italian press. On the personal order of El Duce, absolutely no mention is to be made of the alleged landing of an unknown aircraft on national soil. The same applies to today's news due for publication by the Stefani Agency and individual journalists. Maximum penalty for non-compliance will be enforced by the Tribunal for State Security. More UFO sightings were made in Italy by pilots in 1936. They described a metal-polished disc reflecting light 10 to 12 meters in diameter, which did not emit sound. UFO expert Omar Fowler speaks here about a retired First World War fighter pilot who witnessed a UFO in 1937.
He and his wife had been driving in the car along the South Downs in 1937, and he saw a glowing red light hovering over one of the nearby hills, and he stopped his car and his wife watched it, and then it slowly moved and disappeared out of sight. Now, he thought at the time, he knew that the war was coming because he was still basically a military person and knew what was going on in Germany. And he thought it was something that we had developed at, say, the Royal Aircraft Establishment Farnborough, which was only a matter of 20-odd miles away, some sort of new weapon being developed. So there's a case of a UFO being seen in 1937.
In 1941, a flying saucer came down in Missouri, which was found to contain alien bodies. Reverend Huffman, a Baptist minister, was called to the scene of a suspected plane crash to offer blessings, but when he got there, things were not as he expected, described here by his granddaughter, Charlotte Mann.
When he arrived, as he walked out, there were a lot of other people already there. As he walked up to the scene, he realized that it was not a plane crash. What he saw was a round, saucer-looking object that looked like it was broken in half. There were 3 small aliens that had been removed from the craft and had laid on the ground. Grandfather prayed over each and every one of them.
Oh, my dear Lord.
By that time, the military had arrived in quite a force. And he was taken aside, and he was told in a very stern way, you didn't see this never happened, and due to national security, you are not to speak of this again.
During World War II, many pilots reported seeing UFOs, ranging from massive solid objects to smaller glowing craft, which became known as Foo Fighters, and often tagged along the side of warplanes, as if observing or monitoring what was going on. Ronald Claridge served with the Lancaster Bombers No. 7 Squadron. Detective Constable Gary Heseltine describes Claridge's experience.
He was in a Lancaster bomber returning from a raid over Germany or France, I'm not sure, but I think it was Germany, and on his way back they encountered what could only be described as a huge metal disc, and what was particular importance, relevance of this is that the disc he described as being around 300 feet in diameter with a row of windows, and was completely dwarfed their aircraft. There was a crew of 8, all 8 crew saw the object and confirmed that it was metallic in appearance and it was all disc-shaped. When they landed, they reported it, they were all interviewed about it, and those official reports were actually found in records by David Clark and Annie Roberts during an archive trawl.
After the war, the worldwide political situation was very tense. For the first time, nuclear bombs had been set off, and tension between America and Russia grew. President Truman set up the CIA in order to gain tighter control over intelligence, so that secrecy could be maintained. Not long after this, the most famous of all UFO events took place in the summer of 1947. The Roswell UFO story was so well covered up at the time, it didn't become widely known about until the early 1980s. A UFO crashed, or may have been shot down, and wreckage was recovered by the US Army. Again, alien bodies were recovered, but this time 2 were still alive. 1 died shortly after the crash, but the remaining alien survived for 2 years, during which time the US military studied it and communicated with it. The recovery of the flying saucer was reported in the local press, but once this story got back to President Truman, a major cover-up operation was ordered, led by Brigadier General Ramey. The cover story concocted was that the wreckage was merely a weather balloon. Truman then, in an effort to further cover up the UFO information, set up a group specifically for that purpose called MJ-12, or Majestic 12, consisting of 12 unelected scientists and military men, all sworn to total secrecy. The Americans proceeded to derive and back-engineer technology from the Roswell craft under the direction of General Trudeau, as described in Lieutenant Philip J. Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. Much of the technology was subsequently introduced into the commercial world. Although the public were not largely aware of the Roswell event at the time, just 2 weeks before the Roswell incident, a major sighting took place, which generated mass attention, and probably marks the start of the UFO era. Kenneth Arnold, flying his own plane, observed very bright objects traveling at tremendous speed, and calculated the speed to be 1,700 miles per hour, which was unheard of at that time. He described their motion as erratic and unlike any known aircraft. A further UFO recovery operation took place in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948, where more than a dozen dead alien bodies were recovered from an almost intact UFO. Again, this event was covered up until fairly recently, after people involved in the recovery operation broke their silence and spoke about the event. In the late 1940s, a struggle within the American military took place, as some insiders wanted the public to know what they knew. In late 1947, the US Air Force set up a project to investigate flying disc cases called Project Sign under Lieutenant General Nathan F. Twining, who was a member of the secret MJ-12 group. Project Sign produced a document called An Estimate of the Situation, which stated that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the most likely explanation for the flying discs. This document reached US Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vandenberg, also an MJ-12 member, in early October 1948. Vandenberg rejected its conclusion and ordered that all copies be burned. From this point on, the cover-up has continued and still prevails to this day.